The brief announcement that I wanted to make is that we are very excited about the trip that's coming up this March for the temple, going to Israel, going around the envelope around Gaza, going to Tel Aviv, going to Jerusalem, going to Masada if you haven't been there, going to Yad Vashem, going to the library. There is so much that we're going to a winery, we're going to a cooking lesson. I mean, we have stuffed this with so many things that many of us, like myself, and maybe one or two of you, think maybe I should get there a day or so earlier. Maybe I should have a little rest time. Maybe I want a little more time. I definitely want a little more time in the library. The brand new, gorgeous, state-of-the-art, magnificent, drop-dead, magnificent library. I don't want someone to say, okay, meet you at the door in 45 minutes. That's not for me in books, okay? So for us, personally, my personal trip, I'm going ahead of time, my husband and I. And we know of several other people who want to do the same thing. So keep that in mind so that maybe we can, put together an extra itinerary for those who want to go early. And just get in contact with either Jody Adler or myself. There's a form to fill in right on the Israel trip and website. And it looks like a great trip, and even greater if you want to start a little earlier. Okay, hope to see you all there.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I hope you will indeed join us for that trip. And one announcement before I introduce our guest speaker for this evening. At your places, you have a flyer about our next semester's course, which I'll be teaching on the thought and works of Maimonides. It is a 13-session course like this one that we're doing now, and it will run from January through May. When you go to the link to register, it'll have all the dates of when we have and do not have the class. I want to invite and encourage you to go ahead and register now. If you're enjoying this method of study that we're doing this semester, then I think you'll really like the class. We're going to be, doing the same kind of mode of study. You're going to get a big binder with all kinds of material to read. We're going to do in-depth study of texts written by Maimonides. I think you will love it. Please register before December 12th. Okay, because I know at Temple Beth-El, this is a big ask because people like to register not only at the very last second, but also after the course has even started. But this time, what I want to ask you to do is to please register by December 12th. That will enable our office to prepare the materials for you in time for the start of the class. It makes it a lot easier on us, okay? If you register for the course before December 12th, it costs $50 to take the course. If you register after December 12th, you can still take it, but it will cost $100. It's an incentive for you to register before December 12th. Please do, okay?
Are you going to be capping it again?
Well, let's see. Let's see. If everybody signs up before December 12th, then I think it'll take care of itself. But please go ahead and do that. And you can, on your flyer, there's a QR code. If you know how to use it.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work? Okay. Well, I don't know why that's the case, but I'll have to talk to our office about it. If you are having difficulty with that, you can call the office, or you can go onto our website. I apologize for that, and we'll have to figure it out. But please do sign up for the course. Now, with that, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce to you our guest teacher for tonight's session. We have Dr. Benjamin Gampel with us. He is the Adina and Eli Field Family Chair in Jewish History at the Jewish Theological Seminary. A specialist in medieval and early modern Jewries, Dr. Gampel's most recent book, Anti-Jewish Riots in the Crown of Aragon and the Royal Response, 1391 to 1392, won the 2016 National Jewish Book Council's Nahum M. Sarna Memorial Award in Scholarship. This prize-winning volume treats the riots and forced conversions of 1391 in the Iberian Peninsula and explores why monarchic authority failed to protect the Jews during these fate-filled months. In addition to his scholarship, Dr. Gampel is known as a stimulating teacher and delightful lecturer on a whole range of Jewish history. And he was recommended to us by our wonderful friend, Mickey Dobbin, who has studied with him before, along with some others of you as well. He has addressed synagogue and lay groups, organizations of all stripes, and scholarly conclaves. Truly an energetic scholar and teacher, Dr. Gampel is dedicated to bringing the history of the Jews to a wide public audience. He knows that what we have been learning in our course up to this point, and that we have great background in medieval Spain, and that is his field of expertise. He's going to be talking to us about tonight. So let's welcome Dr. Gampel.
Yeah. Thank you, Rabbi Stoller. And hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to see you. It's nice to be here. Yes. Anti-Semitism. American Jews, time and again, have focused their energies on attempting to understand this phenomenon. To investigate anti-Semitism from all possible points of view: psychological, political, social, economic, theological. We seem to be treading the same ground over and over, haven't we? We want to get to the root of what anti-Semitism is all about. And obviously, what spurs our interest in anti-Semitism? It's true among scholars. And all of you want to know how the 12th and 13th centuries differ in terms of Jew hatred. And if you are one of them, not to be concerned, because you will be satisfied before you leave. But I think something else is taking place. That all our concerns about the past are usually motivated by the present. We seek answers in the past. Or sometimes what we really seek is corroboration for our own particular prejudice. We're human. The rabbi told me, and I was quite impressed with what you have covered over the last number of weeks. And that you spend time in one of my favorite places, in Spain. Perhaps you took a side trip to Portugal. You got there early just to make sure that you'd be rested up for the whirlwind tour. Hey, I know. I was just hiding behind the computer, right? Listening to everything as it transpired. But there is a reason why the Iberian Peninsula captures our attention. Oh, yes, it's the past. Yes, it's fun to visit Spain. But because we see in the history of the Jews who lived hundreds of years ago in Spain and Portugal, we somehow see it, correctly or not, as I try and make sure not to kill myself while I trip over the wire.
Just worried about
But
it.
it's really very good, because part of my exercise routine, of course, as you well know, is to make sure to keep your balance, to keep your peripheral vision sharp. And there's no better way of doing it than stepping over the wire purposefully as I try to make eye contact with all of you. But the reason why Spain and Portugal attract us is because we know some things about it. And we identify with it. If we know something, we know that these Jews in Spain and Portugal, in Al-Andalus during Muslim times, they seem to have lived, at least some historians say, through a golden age. They were politically powerful and religiously vital and economically successful, intellectually creative. We American Jews like to imagine we're the same. Wow. And what else do we know about Spain and Portugal?
Transition.
Yes, that's true, as everything does.
The wrong
But
word.
also that it was a society that did not simply have one homogeneous group of people, but rather was home to devotees of the three monotheistic religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. But there's something else that captures our imagination. And if I may say, scares us a little bit. Because just like everybody can say, yes, the golden age, whatever that might mean. But everybody also knows that the Jews were expelled from Castile and Aragon in 1492, and Portugal in 1496, and Navarre in 1497. How did that happen? How should we understand this phenomenon? Now, I must say, and I haven't been listening to your conversations, it's easy to say, hey, anti-Semitism, it's as old as the Jews. It's always there. Have you heard that line a couple of times? I've heard it more than a couple of times. You don't want to go there. I'll make it personal. Maybe some of you have attended parent-teacher conference
Oh, yes.
when your kids were in school, or relatives' kids were in school. And if they tell you that little Eric has been acting out in the first grade, you turn to your partner and say, I never liked Mona Sally. Her eye contact. I can see why Eric does. But when in the 11th grade, you're still getting the same reports. Uh-oh. If you say that anti-Semitism is old as the Jews, you know what the next comment has to be. What's wrong with the Jews? It's simplistic. And just because we can recite a litany of when Jews were harmed during their life as a people, that doesn't mean they were always harmed for the same reasons. And we also have to keep in mind, and this is crucial, that Jews also were successful. And we could point to centuries and centuries of success. And that also doesn't owe simply just to one reason. So what do we need to do? We need to focus on particular time periods, particular events, and attempt to understand what's at root of the seemingly hatred of Jews which crops up every now and then. That yes, if there's latent reactions, negative reactions to people who are not the same as yourself, something which was part of the human condition, why does it flare up in particular times? Okay, golden age, here we come. If you want a paper in front of you, I think this Don't you like the turquoise, Rabbi?
I do.
In this.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I really thought it was nice. You too could find it if you Google it. What we're looking at here is, we all have this map in front of us, excuse my back, is, you see, the Mediterranean. You see Al-Andalus, which is today Spain and Portugal. And what I want you to begin to imagine is that you're looking at one civilization, an Islamic civilization, whose center is at the edge of your map in Baghdad. Yes, Muhammad was born in 571, he dies in 632. Where after Muhammad died, within the next century, Muslim forces traveled east and west, conquer as far east beyond Baghdad to India and even today into Pakistan, and west all the way through Al-Andalus, through what today is Spain and Portugal, and into southern France. What an extraordinary conquest this was. And as you learned with the rabbi in some recent time, the Jews played a role in Muslim theology and in Muslim imagination. As Islam spread its wings over such a vast territory, they encountered a variety of peoples and they had to create a theology that took into account these varying national and religious groups. And briefly, yes, the Covenant of Umar, which I heard you read, tells us that Jews and Christians, by the way, were all to enjoy certain rights. No one could harm them, no one could kill them. They could have whatever jobs they wanted, could live where they wished. This is all ideal. That doesn't mean Jews weren't harmed. It's an idealistic perspective. And also control their own affairs religiously. By the standards of the 8th century, it was breathtaking. And at the same time I make this argument, I don't want you to confuse this striking doctrine of tolerance with equality. Tolerance and equality is not the same thing. When somebody says, oh yes, X moved into my neighborhood, but I'm tolerant. In a world of equality, nobody cares what you think about that other person. They don't need your approval. They're not going to pick you up on a chair and dance around you because you're tolerant. But equality is a function of modernity, not of the past. Function of the 18th century and onward. And even then it has trouble finding roots across the world. So, yes, in Islamic theology, the Jews who were seen as amongst the teachers of Muhammad are tolerated, granted these rights in exchange for taxes, always, yes. Can never be wrong. When a teacher asks you something and you say money, you got a good shot at it. Yes, in exchange for taxes, jizya, haraj, gifts, and you saw in the Covenant of Umar, signs of second-class citizenship. Making sure you're marked off. But here in Al-Andalus, if you will, in the wild west of this great Islamic empire, you see how it's all the way in the corner. Very distant from the center of Muslim power. This Al-Andalus was riven by strife. Oh, there were so many national and ethnic groups, Arabians and Syrians and Slavs and Berbers, and a variety of religions, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And when Abd al-Rahman III, that's the third, don't confuse it in your notes. You laugh, but how many times have I seen an exam with Abd al-Rahman II written?
I was laughing because it was so familiar.
Ah, thank you, thank you. Forgive me for jumping on your remark. Under Abd al-Rahman III, Abd al-Rahman realizes, yes, in 929, that the only way his peninsula could be united under his rule is by taking charge of it on his own. He declares independence from Baghdad, and he fashions a government where he invites and encourages all national and religious elements to participate in that government. Wow. Good times for a lot of people, good times for the Jews. And Abd al-Rahman appoints the most successful Jew in the Jewish community. His name happened to have been Chaskai Meshachut, to be the representative of the Jews. The Jewish community doesn't choose him. The government chose him. Jews are invited into the halls of power. Seems good, doesn't it? I wonder when the storm is going to. I'm not sure yet. We're still beginning. Abd al-Rahman does successfully unite the peninsula. Jews walking in the corridors of power not only meant that the Jews were well connected, but had a profound impact upon Judaism. There's one thing, Jews who live in a culture where their culture is antagonistic to them. But here, where the Jews are invited in, what are they seeing and what are they witnessing? They're witnessing Muslim power up close. They're witnessing an ambitious monarch who's not just satisfied with political power, but it wants cultural efflorescence to match that power. He brings in Muslim scholars from all over the world, manuscripts of the Quran. He builds brilliant libraries. Sounds great, doesn't it? But now the Jews have certain tension with that society, don't they? It's glittering. There are Muslim poets and scientists and philosophers and astronomers. There are Muslims who study the Quran, who study Arabic, who write brilliant works in that language. And the Jews begin to fashion a culture according to the Muslim curriculum. Muslims study Arabic, they're going to study Hebrew along some of the same methodological ways. The Muslims study the Bible carefully. The Quran, the Jews will study their Bible. The Muslims explore their Hadith, the traditions, the Jews, the Talmud. Jews so brilliant culture in Hebrew, based on their own books, but influenced by Muslim curricular ideals. We know that tune, don't we? Most of us can whistle that tune. Well, maybe not all of us. Works, if you will, for the Muslim state. Jewish courtiers are accepted. Wow. We just look ahead for 1 century. We find continue in every generation.
Could you use a microphone?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Does that sound better?
Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
On this side.
Yeah.
On this side. Okay,
Thank you.
I'm sitting down. Yes, it could be as I was playing, skip rope, I have dropped my microphone. Okay. I like when my voice sounds loud. Gives me a sense of gravitas. Even if the comments aren't that well and learned, they surely seem that way. I'll have to keep that in mind. Jewish courtiers continue to serve Muslim governments. Jews are seen as a special people under Islam. Jews continue to amass power. So much so that if we look at the next century, we see an absolutely extraordinary figure. I thought this question was about anti-Semitism. When is he getting to? Never worry. Anti-Semitism always shows up. I'm talking about the 11th century Shmuel HaNagid, who worked for the king of Granada. Abdul Rahman's empire had fragmented. And what a man he was. The diplomat. When we to trust Moshe ben Ezra, a later poet, he even was commander-in-chief of the armies of Granada. Wow. And we know, thanks to the Cairo Geniza, that wonderful repository of documents, we have over 2,000 poems that Shmuel HaNagid wrote. He wrote commentary on the Talmud. He wrote a book on grammar. He even wrote a polemic against Islam. Quite the guy. How many folks do you know, you've studied Jewish history, who is a commander-in-chief of armies and writes poetry? Good. That was the easy one. You have another one? In fact, I love one of Shmuel HaNagid's poems. He's on the battlefield, and at time for afternoon prayers, it's mincha time. He writes a poem to God. He said he doesn't have time to pray the mincha service. So could God please accept this little poem in lieu of? Quite a guy. Self-regard. Okay, so let's say he wasn't commander-in-chief. I'm skeptical. But what he did is absolutely staggering. Such intrigue in the palace in Granada, and yet he always stays a step ahead of the game. Shmuel HaNagid is so powerful that he's able to install his son Yehosef as his successor. Nachas. Shmuel HaNagid's probably greatest accomplishment, though, is that he dies in 1056 of natural causes. He was quite the guy. Yehosef, a poet in his own right. His father trained him. He would send him poems back from the battlefield via carrier pigeon and ask him to copy them over. I see Yehosef having a facial twitch that he was never able to control. Whenever a bird flew near him, he always imagined his father was sending him more homework. But what we do know about Yehosef HaNagid is that palace intrigue continued, and Yehosef was killed in 1066. But then, as soon as Yehosef was killed, 300 Jews were massacred in the streets of Granada. How golden was this? Remember, don't say the bottom line, because the bottom line is there is no bottom line. Why were the Jews able to be so successful? Because the Jews were trusted. Why were they trusted? Because they were a minority people. a minority people who were dependent on the king because they had no aspirations to full political power, like maybe some of the Muslim rivals. And then there's something else, something which Yehosef's death brings into focus. And that is the reason why a Jewish courtier was accepted was that, without actually saying so, one role moved by the Jewish courtier and the Jews would be harmed. And that ensured that the Jews would be loyal. What I'm arguing is that the Jews being singled out by Islam is the cause of their great success. But also within that dynamic lies the seeds as well of their downfall. Don't privilege 1066 over the other 2 centuries, and don't privilege those 2 centuries over 1066. One of the challenges of studying anti-Semitism is separating anti-Semitism as a phenomenon in society by imagining that it's separate, by imagining that it has its own life. Rather, what I'm going to be suggesting even more so this evening is that anti-Semitism is one facet of Jewish life in the societies in which they live. Sometimes the same factors that lead to their success can also lead to their downfall. The life of a minority group dependent on others is always precarious. Al-Andalus is going to change again because Al-Andalus is controlled by Islam. But already at the time of Shmuel Hanagid, a number of years later, there begins to be groups, specifically Christian groups, that begin to attack the Muslims. When the Muslims conquered, the people who they conquered the peninsula from, the Visigoths, were pressed into the mountain ranges in the north of the peninsula. Starting in 1085, Christians that have continued to take a little more territory time and again, conquered the city of Toledo in 1085. It wasn't a grand city under Islam, Toledo. The glorious city. It had been the capital of the Visigoths, which for the Christians then was extraordinary. You might like to know that when the Christians captured Toledo, they began to refer to their fight against the Muslims as a reconquista, a reconquest. We're not taking the land from the Muslims. What are we doing? Yes, all of us in this room know what reconquista is, right? We're not conquering. We're just taking that which is rightfully ours, of which we have a history. Whoa, Christians conquering Toledo. The Jews had fashioned their culture from a symbiotic relationship with Islam and with Muslims. It wasn't only their security, but the language they spoke Arabic, the curricular values they had. The Muslims prized poetry, and the Jews did as well. The Muslims saw that the greatest individual intellectually is the philosopher. And the Jews began to feel the same way. The Muslims also prized law, and the Jews felt comfortable with that. And now, the Christians seem to be making inroads. What did the Jews do? Their whole culture is under attack, and they're wary of the Christians. Just a sidebar, the rabbi's beginning, remember to register by December 10th. Could you please do us a favor? So the QR code doesn't work. You got a phone? Okay,
Thank you.
I just,
Perfect.
while I'm at it, I just thought, what the heck? And the reason why I mention it is because our friend Maimonides, whom we will talk about, is born in 1135, or 3, or 1, or 8, depending. You have to understand, when great people were born, nobody knew they were great. When Maimonides was born, they didn't say, and look, here is Maimonides. I gotta tell you, when Maimonides dies, they know the year, they know the Hebrew month, they know the date, and know the time of day. Because he dies as Maimonides. Maimonides lives at a time when the Muslims are looking for help from the South, from North Africa, to help them fight against the Christians. And a variety of tribes come, first Al-Muwahhidun, then before that Al-Murabitun, these various tribes who don't have a generous spirit towards Jews and Christians. Maimonides and his family living in Cordoba have to flee. We don't know what happened during those tense-filled years, but we know in 1159, 1160, the family is in Fez, in today's Morocco. So clearly Islam was not able to protect them at that point. Whenever somebody wants to essentialize for you Islam's relationship with the Jews, or Christians' relationship with the Jews, always be wary. Islam and the Jews have been hanging out together for 1,500 years. You think there were some good times? You think there were some bad times? You think you can boil it down to one or the other? Does that make it difficult? Isn't it easier if everything's black and white? Just tell me who my enemy is, tell me who my friends are, and I can go to school and relax. But it doesn't work that way. So here come the Christians. Christian theological attitudes toward the Jews surely made the Jews wary. Oh, the Jews may have rejected Muhammad, as they did in Medina, but they were still seen as amongst Muhammad's teachers. They may have rejected Islam, but it's nothing like crucifying God's only son. Christians, yes, sir.
Well, they also believed in one God instead of three.
Yes, yes. Christians believe they are monotheists,
But,
as Jews do.
but Jews and Muslims don't believe that Christians are monotheists.
Yes, well, complicated. Some who do, some who don't, and it's dependent on the situation. Yeah, I wish I could say, yes, Jews don't. In certain cases, Jews did see Christians as monotheists, in other cases not. But for our purposes, Christianity saw the Jews as the former chosen people of God. Corporal Israel, Israel in the flesh. You know, God's an ever-loving God. God is full of grace. God is charitable. God is kind. These Israelites, I'm telling you, if you read the Bible, oh my goodness. Can't you just get it together and follow God's word? Is it so hard? Thank you. That's why you get there early. To prepare yourself. God's word. God sends prophets. Don't do this. God is still filled with grace and kindness. But then God decides to be incarnate in humanity. God's only son. And what do the Jews do? Mock and scorn him and crucify him. And what does God do? He's had it. He chooses a new Israel. Those who confess Christ. And the Jews, what do you do with them? Keep them alive. Testify to the truth of the Old Testament. And you keep them the base to testify to the truth of the New Testament. And you keep some alive because of the Messianic dream. That when Jesus returns, those who mocked and scorned him will return to him in grace. Here's the 13th century. Next map, please. We're now in the 13th century. With yellow and purple and green. The Christians are extraordinarily successful. The Reconquista, which will be fully operational and completed in 1492, in January, by the mid-13th century, has dominated most of the peninsula. Kingdom of Portugal, Kingdom of Castile, Kingdom of Aragon, the Crown of Aragon, which has Aragon, Valencia, and also the Principality of Catalonia, and the Kingdom of Navarre. How are the Jews doing in the 13th century in Christian Spain? They're doing well. Do you know why they're doing well? Because there are Jews and Christians and Muslims who live in the peninsula. And when the Christians conquer, and they were an agricultural people and involved in pasturing animals, especially sheep, when they take over all of the cities and the trade routes from Islamic Al-Andalus, they need people to help them out. They need people to live in the cities. They need people to conduct trade. Can they trust the Muslims? Muslims are their enemy. Who are the third world people yet again? If you're thinking of saying Jews, you'd be right. Jews are welcomed back into the courts of the Christian monarchs. They help with the repartition of the land. It's good to be in the 13th century, young, Jewish, and talented. You have business opportunities, political opportunities. Yes, no longer Islam, but it's Christianity, and we're needed. In fact, the rabbi learned with you, studied with you, a wonderful text from Alfonso X, the son of Ferdinand III, who was the major force conquering the kingdom of Castile. Alfonso X really was a very ambitious person. He wanted to be the Holy Roman Emperor. He tried for 25 years, didn't make it. But what he did do is he wrote a general history. He wrote a new calendar, and very modestly, with his regnal year as year 0. Hey, your king. And he writes a law code in 7 parts, the Siete Partheres. And you read some of those laws. On the one hand, he gives voice to the blood libel in law number 2, but ultimately protects the Jews by saying that the cases have to come before him, and they have to be proved. And on the other hand, in the last law, I think it's the 11th, he says that the Jews have to wear a distinguishing mark upon their clothing, echoing the Lateran Council of 1215 of Innocent III. Wow. And in a remarkable split or purposeful in the middle, he talks about the sanctity of synagogues. And he says, in a line that he didn't need to say, trying to explain why you can't come into a synagogue to take out a malefactor who seeks sanctuary, because a synagogue is the place where the name of God is praised. Next time you're in a hotel, take out the Gideon's Bible. Or maybe you have your own copy. You don't need the hotel's copy. However it works. Look at John 8, verse 44. Synagogue is the synagogue of Satan. Your father is the devil. That's tough language. Something's going on with Alfonso X. Al knows Jews. He does. He also, in a couple of towns, incarcerates most of the Jewish community, and until they pay a certain amount of money so he can continue some of his military exploits. I'm going to make the argument, that I am right now, that in the 13th century, in Castile, and we'll see in Aragon, the Jews are living their best life anywhere in the world. Is there anti-Judaism? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Let's go to the crown of Aragon, in purple on your right-hand side. There, the conqueror was King James I. King James I has so many Jewish advisors that he even has Jewish advisors running the royal treasury. The Pope is astounded. He writes a letter to James that you cannot have Jews in such high positions. And famously, what does James answer? I have no Jews in any high position. In medieval Catalan, this is called lying. It's not that he was tricking the Pope. The Pope knew that he knew that the Pope knew. Everybody knew. You called the treasury late Friday afternoon in the winter. No one answered. Even with a QR code, they didn't answer. Yet the same James I, hosts the first great public disputation in Barcelona in 1263 between Pau Christia, Jew who converted to Christianity, and the great Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. The goal ultimately is the conversion of the Jews. Knew how the Jews do it. There's no right answer, so feel free, because there is no right answer. Have to skip a few years. You'll forgive me. So let's go to Toledo in the 14th century. How's the mid-14th century? Good? Good, excellent. I was thinking the same thing. Some of you visited Toledo. You saw the synagogue, now called Synagoga del Transito. Who built that synagogue? Probably as a private chapel. Shmuel Halevi Abulafia, who was the tesorero mayor. He was the main treasurer, the chief treasurer of the kingdom of Castile. Pretty cool. Not assistant to the royal treasurer. He was the treasurer. He didn't work in his office. He was it. Synagogue is gorgeous. How are the Jews doing? Looks good. Looks good. Look, you all know what happens. This is one of those stories where everybody knows the end of the movie. So I have something to tell you. Just because you know the end of the movie, that doesn't mean you know how it worked out. Oh, it's easy to say after something happens. Any devotees of baseball here? Just giggles. That means not really. When the winner of the World Series is apparent, every commentator will tell you why that team was destined to win. Since I'm looking at a mature audience, otherwise known as looking in the mirror. Remember when Sadat visited Jerusalem?
Yeah.
You remember how shocked everyone was? I remember reading an article in the Times Magazine like 2 or 3 months later. It was obvious he had to visit Jerusalem, given the economic dynamics within Egypt. I'd like all of us to maintain a certain, oh my God, I never knew that was going to happen. Because that's far more honest. It's less satisfying. Because ultimately, what we want to say? Oh, I knew it was coming, yes, of course. Stock market really good. Isn't that what I told you? You voted, I told you. Even though Shmuel Halevi Abulafia is the main treasurer, it's interesting. The king that time was Pedro I. A civil war breaks out in Castile a few years later. His half-brother, Enrique of Trastamara, was his half-brother, bastard half-brother, not an adjective, but a story of his conception. Rises to power and is eventually successful because also a major part of his political platform is heavily anti-Jewish. That his brother has so many Jews in his employ. Henry does become king, and a scholar a number of years ago did research into Henry's reign and his advisors, and you know what he found? Henry had the same number of Jews that his brother did. What do we learn from this? The Jews were needed, the Jews were significant, and saying that you were against the Jews was helpful. Okay, thank you. I have to figure out when dramatic that I could lower the mic, and when lowering the mic means not only no drama, but no sound. So thank you, I appreciate it. I'm now going to steam ahead to the final conclusion. There's also going to be a lot of time for questions. Jews were protected by the monarchs who knew them. The king of Castile dies in 1390. There's an underage monarch. It's a regency situation. in the Crown of Aragon, these are the two major kingdoms, there's a thriving monarchy. But it's in Seville, in June of 1391, that riots break out against the Jews. Yes, riots. Jews are attacked. Synagogues are destroyed. And many Jews are forcibly converted. It doesn't stop in Seville. It moves to Cordova a week later, and to Toledo, to Burgos, to many of the towns in the northern part of Castile. Riots break out against the Jews as well in the Crown of Aragon and Valencia in July. Up and down the Mediterranean coast in Barcelona on the 5th of August. In Mallorca, a beautiful island in the Mediterranean, a little earlier, August the 2nd. These riots go on for 10 months. Jews are killed, Jewish institutions are destroyed, and many Jews are forcibly converted. So what might you say? Okay, that's it. History doesn't move in a straight line. If it did and there were signposts, we'd all know what to do. But it doesn't. The Jews in Castile revive after a couple of decades. They move out of the big cities. There are Jews who still are advisors to monarchs. Less so in the Crown of Aragon, which maybe has lost a third of its Jewish population. Jewish community in Barcelona never revives. What no one knew at that time, back to what I had said about Sadat, what no one knew at that time was that the fate of the Jews was no longer bound up with the Jews, but rather the fate of the Jews was bound up with those who had been forcibly converted to Christianity. Whenever there's a mass conversion, it's hard to assimilate and acculturate into the religious group that is dominant. Sure, if a person converts and embraces your religion, you can pick them up on a chair and dance around them. But what happens when thousands come? And what happens when these new Christians in the thousands come and they also attend the local church? And when they get jobs that have been off limits to them as Jews, that they begin to also move to areas within towns and villages which had not seen a Jewish population. And a reaction to the new Christians, an economic reaction, a social reaction. Wow, I bet they didn't really convert because they meant to. They converted in order to gain the benefits. Some Jews we know in the 15th century become notaries public. I could see that jealousy. Remember my uncle when he had a little notary pad. I always wanted to play with it. And they give him a quarter. It was so magic, absolute magic. Notaries public were officers of the court, and in the 15th century, they were significant positions. Not that my uncle did not maintain a significant position, he did, and I'm proud of him, and may he rest in peace. But I don't want you to confuse the two. And then there are religious suspicions. It's not only the fact that socially and economically they're beginning to displace us, but religiously. They say that they are Christians, but they still don't know how to behave within the church. They still don't know the right hymns. They don't stand up when you should be sitting down and vice versa. They don't know how to take communion. So from a religious point of view, suspicions begin to grow about these new Christians. And what's the accusation? they're still secretly Jewish.
Somewhere.
Some were. Some were. Yes, they were called Marranos, might mean pigs.
Oh, it is.
Yes, might mean that, yes. Riots start to break out in Castile in the mid-15th century. But guess what? Not against the Jews. Against the new Christians. You're Jewish. Okay, I feel badly for them. That's my second cousin, but what's for lunch? When Ferdinand and Isabella marry and join two kingdoms, they didn't amalgamate them, Castile and Aragon. Ferdinand and Isabella realize they have a social and religious problem on their hands. They co-opt a papal institution that had been founded in the 13th century, the Inquisition, to discover the truth, to investigate whether these new Christians are really good Christians or secret Jews. And they come to the conclusion that most are secret Jews. Do we accept the inquisitorial results? Partially. Historians should take all documents but weigh their legitimacy. What you do have to understand is that if you're an inquisitor, what are you looking for? Signs of secret Judaism. So if I find someone who attends all the Christian feast days, who fasts during Lent, who celebrates Christmas, who also celebrates Easter, who attends all public religious ceremonies, but does go to a Seder meal because their Aunt Matilda was nudging them for the last 15 years, what does that mean to the inquisitor? Because what does an inquisitor not appreciate? Well, they seem to be Christian and Jewish. Not their theologians, but some, what would you expect? You're living alongside Jews. And we have testimony. Somebody's uncle tells someone, you know, tomorrow's Yom Kippur. Make sure to fast. Invites you to a Seder meal. Ferdinand and Isabella decide, based on inquisitorial findings and other dynamics, and a shock to the Jews, that if we eliminate the Jewish population, the new Christians will no longer be lured into the observance of Judaism. Because Matilda won't be there nudging them about the Seder, nor telling them that it's Yom Kippur. The Jews, Abraham Senior, who was a courtier, was involved seriously in the matchmaking between Ferdinand and Isabella. Not a good move. But that's a post-mortem. He had good reason to think that it would work out well. There's something else that takes place. Ferdinand and Isabella can afford to expel the Jews, because the new Christians now do everything that the Jews do without certain restrictions. They're Jews plus. Who could have seen it coming? Caused by anti-Judaism, to be sure. The King of Portugal has dreams that his son might someday take over the entire peninsula, and is engaged in marital negotiations with Ferdinand and Isabella. He has his eye on one of their daughters. Ferdinand and Isabella asked the King of Portugal to expel the Jews. He finally agrees, but he has a problem. The riots didn't take place in Portugal. There is no large new Christian population. King of Portugal first says that Jews can leave from 5 places on the Atlantic coast, then down to 3, then down to 1 to Lisbon. And with the Jews, according to some, 20,000 Jews descend on Lisbon in 1497. The King of Portugal blockades the harbor and sets the ships that were going to take the Jews away, sets them aflame. And we know that the Jews in Portugal were mass baptized. We had royal officials going up and down the Atlantic coast, effecting mass baptisms. Jews in Navarre had no choice. They were landlocked, and Ferdinand and Isabella made their move. Sad. Terribly sad. Where did Jews go? In the immediate aftermath, they go to North Africa, go to the Mediterranean. As the Ottoman Empire grows stronger, they move to the Ottoman Empire. Why does the Ottoman Empire accept them? Because they're gifted. Because they come with knowledges of Western science. Because they're traders. Because they're linguistically capable. And for a couple of centuries, the Jews thrived in Ottoman Turkey. Getting to whistle the tune. Some of the folks who converted to Christianity, the new Christians who remain in the peninsula. Wow. Striking. The number of them that eventually make their way north to the North Sea, to its ports, famously to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, including the parents of little Baruch Spinoza. How did Jews do in Amsterdam? Wonderfully. The Jews' special character, being recognized by Christians and by Muslims, ensures that they're not forgotten. The Jews are a small population. God should forgive me if I said they're insignificant. But they loom large in the Muslim imagination and even larger in the Christian imagination. Persecuted, yes, but a feature of the landscape. Trusted because they're needed and because they know that the Jews need them. Does this toleration break down? Yes, it does. Does it repair itself? It does. Does it break down in different ways? It continues to. Who in 1412 would have thought that the new Christian population would be the cause of the Jews' vanishing? Yes. Life is precarious. Anti-Semitism has reared its head again. There are many facets to this anti-Semitism, and you know some of them. It's not easy just to reduce it to the hatred of Jews, though that makes us feel morally superior, and by those kinds of feelings are always hard to come by. So when you can be morally superior, hold on to it. Doesn't come by every day. And we're living through a challenging time, and not an easy time. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Was Christopher Columbus and or his crew conversos?
Wow.
Repeat the question.
Yes, I'd be glad to repeat the question. I'll talk straight into the mic. The question is, was Christopher Columbus and his crew, or some of his crew, conversos, or originally Jewish? Okay, you're talking to somebody who has an opinion or two about the subject. There's absolutely no evidence that Christopher Columbus was Jewish or of Jewish ancestry. None.
How about his name Cologne?
Is a fine Spanish name. Now, we do know that at least 3 and maybe 6, including his navigator, Luis de Torres, was a converso. That is true. If Columbus wanted to save Jews, you know what he could have done? Taken a ferry ride to North Africa. Could have gone to Italy. It's not what he chose to do. It seems like the evidence seems to suggest that Christopher Columbus came from Genoa. Generally, Jews did not live in Genoa. He comes from a mill family. No, generally a Christian occupation in Genoa. Now, is it possible that Christopher Columbus's great-great-grandfather traveled from the southern Ukraine and dallied in Genoa for a longer period than was seen? Excuse the Yiddish, the ear anicle has a bit of Jewish blood. Let's say that's true, of which there is no evidence. That would mean that 1/256 said, Christopher, go off to America. My fantasy about that 1/256 is, what do you need, a voyage? Are you kidding me? Water will max, and we're not going to see you for 2 years. Stay still. You got a nice job. They're treating you well. How do we know that 1/256 propelled him to discover the New World? Maybe he was fighting against that 1/256 his whole life. There is no evidence. Salvador de Madariaga wrote a book in the 1930s. It was then shamelessly plagiarized by Simon Wiesenthal and entitled Sails of Hope. What they both have in common is no evidence. The corner of the document, it might say Beth-El. It also might say Go Yankees. We can't tell. He has hundreds of pages in his diary. He says nothing about Judaism. Aha! Is always the response. As opposed to, he's Christian. That's all I got. But yes, please. Oh, let's tie it back into anti-Semitism. In the late 19th century, the American Jewish Historical Society was founded. And one of the first things that they did in the 1880s was to commission a Central European historian named Meyer Kaiserling to write a biography of Christopher Columbus. And this was going to be for an anniversary of Jewish life. Why? Because we do know that in the 1870s, Jews were beginning to face German Jews' social and exclusionary anti-Semitism. Henry Sailorman, who was the Secretary of the Treasury under Ulysses Grant, was kept out of a hotel in Saratoga Springs, New York. Now the challenge is to get Jews into a hotel in Saratoga Springs, New York. If only Christopher Columbus were Jewish. It's not only something that the Jews feel, but the Italians feel, Hispanics feel. There was a letter to the editor a few decades ago where somebody wrote that Christopher Columbus was a Croatian nationalist. Okay, fine by me. When we claim early ancestry, on one hand, it seems like such, and it's true, a great love and attachment to the country. But it also conceals or covers over loosely an anxiety about our belonging. So if only Christopher Columbus were Jewish. But you know, in 1992, when the beginning of the reaction against colonialization and Western conquerors were seen highly negatively, he's not Jewish. He's not helping us. I'm sure he's Italian. I'm sure he's Hispanic. He could be Croatian, anything. So I think we should understand those dynamics. Yes, please.
I had the great privilege several years ago to visit Belmonte.
Northern Portugal.
Yes, and this is the town where people hid their Judaism
Mhm.
for so many generations that they
Mhm.
didn't even know what
Mhm.
it was that they were doing
Mhm.
anymore. Like lighting a candle in a blackened closet every
Mhm.
Friday night, not knowing why. How many, were there many other places that managed to survive like that?
The extraordinary thing is that when there was an anthropologist by the name of Schwartz, who did that work as a scientist, but then became an amateur anthropologist, it took the world by surprise.
It was fascinating.
Northern Portugal. It's because of its isolated situation that those traditions were able to be passed on. It is striking. In that sense, it gives us a certain sense of comfort because, yes, there has been expressions of hatred of Jews and harm towards Jews, but sometimes the Jewish spirit survives. So it makes us feel wonderfully. But we shouldn't always imagine that that was the case for the majority or for most. Everybody now knows about Marranos and secret Jews. And as a result, everybody has a story about a person who didn't know why. Everybody knows why. Once buses start showing up in Belmonte and they begin to sell artifacts and plates that you can put on a wall, suitable for gifting, you realize that begins to affect the stories that we tell.
Well,
Nevertheless, it is a story of triumph.
But isn't that also true about Portugal altogether? That after the 1992,
Mhm.
you know, forgiveness of please forgive us, whatever, in Spain,
Mhm.
Portugal said, hey, the Jews are traveling to Spain, you know, let's have some more tourism here. And there's a big rock in the middle of, I forget which town, the main town that we went to visit, with a great big Jewish star painted in blue on the rock. And it's to honor the people who died in the Alta Fe.
Yes, and may I say Moses Maimonides, born in Cordova, there is a lovely statue of Maimonides in Cordova. When was it erected? In the 1930s, precisely to get Jewish tourist dollars.
Worked.
It's complicated. I took a picture of it, though I made sure to include the fellow who sells the postcards right next, so it gives you a commercial element. Yes, things have multi-valences. Yes, it was a hand there, please. Yes, thank you.
Yes, just, something that confuses me, and I keep getting it straight and unstraight. The Inquisition in Spain was aimed at the new Christians.
Yes.
Not the Jews.
That's right.
Okay.
When anybody says, yes, and the Jews lived through the Inquisition, I giggle. Though I'm a professional, so I don't giggle loud. Yes, the Inquisition has jurisdiction over Christians. Were sometimes, very rarely, Jews as witnesses, yes. Once in a while, a Jew would be accused if they were seen as, providing kosher meat to their new Christian relatives, which we have some cases. But yes, the Inquisition, and also to keep in mind, The Inquisition was not a church institution. Ferdinand and Isabella gave permission from Pope Sixtus IV to have an Inquisition under crown control. It is a monarchic institution. Do they hire priests? Yes, but the king and queen are in charge. It's not the church. That's spelled D-U-H if you're taking notes, and then followed by church. It's all the church is full. You might see it in a sentence. Yeah, was there another hand in? Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
So there's a lot of stories when you look at like the food cultures of the Iberian Peninsula, that a lot of these sort of trade forward foods like paella, pork and clams.
Is precisely.
Right.
I feel the same way about it as Columbus not mentioning Jews and Judaism for hundreds and hundreds of pages.
Right.
Do you know the cocido madrileño has, why does it have pork? Probably because it's tasty. But it must be. Are there some foods that can be associated with Jews that had negative connotations? Yes. Berenjena, for example, eggplant, seen as foul tasting. Some people still do, so not to be worried. Jews were seen as eating it. Those of us who've done work in the Spanish archives, as I have, you come across recipes, and David Gitless recently by me means 20, 25 years ago, published a recipe book, because you accuse somebody of being Jewish or of Jewish ancestry, and then you say what they did. They took onions and garlic, and onions and garlic always, and then meat, etc., etc. Okay, we'll take two more if I may.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when you talk about the golden age, were the Jews still considered, I understand they were in trade, they were in business, they, had good positions, but were they still, they weren't equal? So they
No.
were still second class.
Yes.
So
It's
what
a-
were some of the,
Disabilities that they
well, I wouldn't
possess.
say disabilities, but what were some of the things that made them second, like that were obvious, so that they remained second class
Means
despite this?
you can't aspire to full political power. You had many times limitations on it, taking positions where you were in a superior position than Muslims. It meant that you were although you were allowed to live everywhere, there was still somewhat exclusionary. And you also suffered indignities, such as paying of those onerous taxes, and covenant of Umar, shown signs that you weren't going to stand up when a Muslim came in, certain limitations on your social and religious life.
So you accepted the idea that you were less?
The Muslims were in charge, and they like us. No, I'm with you. I'm just saying,
I'm just trying to,
Yes.
get the picture.
but if
Because
you
it's
live,
like, this is good, so good, so good, and then I'm thinking,
That's right.
so good,
okay, I'll add a little more.
okay.
When you live in a world of toleration, and nobody knows from equality, you'll excuse me, monotheists don't know from equality. Your religion is right. I'm sorry to say the implication that everybody knows means your religion is wrong.
Right.
Tolerance is not equality. Nobody dreamt of equality then. So what, to ask a Jew in 13th century Spain, like under Christians, how is it? They wouldn't say we're not equal because it would never cross their minds they could be. Built into the system. So why is it a golden age, you say?
Well, because it was better than it was.
Ah, yes, and also, this is a little Jewish history lesson, and I'll take my last question. Who came up with the term golden age? That's rhetorical, I'll answer it. Franz Delitzsch in the 19th century, a liberal Christian who wanted the Jews to accept the offer of emancipation in Germany. Because many Jews did not want to be equal and emancipated. Because in Germany, that also meant giving up on your religious community, on control by the rabbis and by the elders. And they said, no, we'd rather live as we had in the past. So many Jews and Christian allies who saw the benefits, economic, first and foremost, and social, of emancipation, of civil rights, used history as a proving ground to these Jews. Look at the 10th and 11th century, they told them. See how the Jews were powerful, creative, successful? That was your golden age. And you could recreate it, just join the society. Look how they still remain Jewish, and they still wrote great works of poetry and philosophy that last till today. Yes.
We have a
go
question
ahead.
on Zoom.
We have a question online.
Oh, on Zoom too, okay, Zoom,
So go, let's do that and then we'll get Karen on. Yeah.
please.
This is a question that, what I'd like to know is, you talked about anti-Semitism in the past.
Mhm.
I'd like to know what you think about anti-Semitism right now. I grew up in New York. I have never felt any feeling about anti-Semitism, I mean, personally. I went to public school. I've lived in New York, I've traveled around the world. I'd like to know what's happening now. I'm not saying that I don't think there is. I'd like, if you could give us some examples, or maybe some people here who have known this, since I haven't, to talk about it.
It's an excellent question, it's on all our minds. I'm just gonna talk about a little corner, and I'm gonna muddy the waters while I talk about it.
Okay.
I may not have grown up in the same neighborhoods as you, so I did.
Bronx.
I grew up in the Bronx,
Me too.
so the secret handshake, a real shared outside. So yes, there were remarks that were made, and we kept going. Let's take campuses. I teach at JTS, it's up the block from Columbia and Barnard. Has there been anti-Semitism on both those campuses? Yes. Has there been a lot of difficulty for Jewish faculty members? Yes. Do all the students experience it? Not necessarily. Are also some students, perhaps, of the Jewish community, of our Jewish community, never been faced with arguments against Jews and against Israel? Is this maybe the first time that they've encountered it face to face and causes great discomfiture?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it's very difficult.
All right, we have Karen.
Please.
Karen, go ahead, it'll be the last question. We've got 2 minutes, Karen.
And thank you. I need less. One, a comment question to everybody I put in the chat. Years ago, there was a brilliant, devastating film called Goya's Ghosts. Francisco Goya and the Goyescas, showing the horrors of war there. Brilliant film, and it focused on a new Christian converso family, Jewish family, and just, so if anybody's a film buff and you can bring it up, I really, the power of the Inquisition just really was so horrifically true. Yeah. My other question, well, my experience going to Spain was also involved crossing the whole 8 miles to North Africa. And the realization, 8 miles is a spit and a jump, for any good sailor over the as rough as the seas could get there, so that the North African influence, or the retreat of Jews repeatedly to North Africa, now strikes home even more.
Yeah, I thank you for both of those comments. Goya, a painter I appreciate and enjoy as well, also drew an inquisitorial tribunal, where the head inquisitor is wearing somewhat of a dunce cap, like a tall white conical cap. So maybe check that out as part of the Goyescas. But yes, I'm going to take North Africa and just the proximity of Spain and Portugal to North Africa, the importance of its connections, also helps to explain recently Spain's policies, much more tuned into the Islamic world and its claims, and less so to the Israeli counter narrative. So yes, I think what we see from all of these questions that we were asked, how complex the phenomenon of anti-Semitism is. And if I hope I leave you with one thought is, Bernard Lewis put it well. He was the great historian of Islam and of the Jews under Islam. And he said, isn't it interesting that if you look at where Jewish communities are around the world, the majority of their population, they're in Christian or Muslim countries. So it's precisely those civilizations which we've detailed, sometimes their hatred and harm of the Jews, but the Jews counted in both of those cultures.
Where else could they go? Everything was Israel. They had to be
Exactly.
Christian or Islam.
Well, this will take us even further afield, but as you go further east, for example, in polytheistic cultures, again, your comment is correct. India, China, where Jews had Jewish communities, one could argue that it's precisely because of the welcoming nature of a polytheistic culture. You're Jewish, that's nice. Doesn't matter. And if it doesn't matter,
Not important.
then Jews disappear. And you see that in a way in America as well.
Make it on the.
Jews are accepted. Yeah, they're Jewish. That's nice. I'll serve kugel. Why not? It just has no spark to it.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good night,
Dr.
Clark.
Beth-El. That was an outstanding presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really were honored to have you here tonight. Before you walk out, please, I have investigated QR code gates. It is indeed true that I think the resizing of the QR code for the printing of this flyer made it not work, but our office will be following up to fix it. And you can also register through other ways. You heard Dr. Gampel say, please do register. Next week, we start Unit 4 in our class. It's on the period of the Enlightenment. And we have 3 presenters for our background readings next week. That's Marcy Kessner, Todd Schulman, and Len Schiff.
What?
You're presenting. You're presenting next week. You signed up. The background reading. You can, I'll tell you after we get done here.
Nice a lot.
So, we'll look forward to that. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.